Do-young Kim stood perfectly still in front of the mirror, adjusting his dark blue tie for the 7th time. His movements were slow and careful, just like everything else he did. 20 years in special forces had taught him that rushing often led to mistakes. Mistakes led to death. Ambassador Kim, the alien ship will arrive in 30 minutes. Hae-Newell Park's voice came through the intercom. She was his assistant, and like him, she had a background that went far beyond her current job title. "Thank you, Ms. Park. Is the tea ceremony prepared?" Do-young's voice was soft and pleasant. Anyone who didn't know better would think he was just another polite diplomat. "Yes, Ambassador. Everything is ready in the meeting room." Do-young smiled at his reflection. The smile didn't reach his eyes. Those remained sharp and alert, constantly scanning for threats, a habit from his military days that he had never tried to break. The space station Harmony Point was humanity's chosen location for first contact with the Craxi Empire. It floated peacefully above Earth, its white halls spotless and quiet. Too quiet, Do-young thought. His training told him that excessive quiet often meant trouble was coming. He walked to the meeting room, his footsteps silent despite the hard floor. The room was beautiful in its simplicity. A large round table, comfortable chairs, and a traditional tea set from Earth. Do-young had insisted on the tea set. It gave him something to do with his hands, and more importantly, it gave him an excuse to move around the room. Hae-Newell stood by the door, her tablet in hand. She wore a simple black suit, her hair tied back neatly. "The Craxi delegation includes 5 members," she reported. "Their leader is called Supreme Commander Vex." "Supreme Commander?" Do-young raised an eyebrow. "They sent a military leader for a diplomatic meeting." "Yes, sir. Intelligence suggests the Craxi value strength above all else." Do-young nodded slowly. "Then we will show them strength through perfect manners. Nothing unsettles a bully more than someone who refuses to be provoked." The station's AI announced the Craxi ship's arrival. Do-young watched through the large window as their vessel approached. It was dark and spiky, covered in what looked like weapons. Very different from the smooth, peaceful design of Harmony Point. "Interesting choice of ship design," Hae-Newell said quietly. "Yes," Do-young agreed. "They're trying to scare us." He straightened his tie one last time. "Let's show them how humans respond to intimidation tactics." The Craxi delegation entered the room 10 minutes later. They were tall, muscular aliens with gray skin and sharp features. Their uniforms were covered in medals and symbols that looked like kill markers. Supreme Commander Vex walked in front, his head held high, clearly expecting the humans to be impressed or frightened. Do-young bowed deeply. "Supreme Commander Vex, welcome to Harmony Point. I am Ambassador Do-young Kim, Earth's representative. We are deeply honored by your presence." The Craxi leader looked confused by the bow. He had probably expected the humans to puff up their chests and try to match his aggressive stance. "You bow to me, human. You admit we are superior." "Oh no," Do-young smiled warmly. "In our culture, a bow shows respect and good manners. Please sit. I have prepared tea, a traditional Earth drink shared between friends." The Craxi soldiers looked at each other, unsure how to handle this situation. Their intelligence reports had painted humans as warriors. This human acted more like a servant. Do-young moved gracefully around the table, pouring tea with practiced precision. His movements were smooth and efficient, the same economy of motion he had once used in combat. He noticed the Craxi watching his hands, probably checking for weapons. They wouldn't find any. Do-young hadn't carried a weapon in years. He didn't need to. "The tea must be sipped slowly," he explained, still smiling. "It is very hot." Commander Vex sniffed the tea suspiciously. "You drink this weak water. Where is the blood wine? The victory mead?" "I apologize if the choice of drink disappoints you," Do-young said, bowing again. "Perhaps next time we can serve something more to your taste." As he spoke, he was counting weapons, noting weak points in their armor, analyzing their reaction times. Old habits. Hamnul stood quietly in the corner, taking notes. Like Du Young, she saw how the Kraxi soldiers kept their fingers near their weapons, how they positioned themselves for quick action, how they watched the doors and windows. Let us discuss trade, Du Young suggested, sitting down with perfect posture. Earth has many resources that might interest the Kraxi Empire. Trade. Vex laughed loudly. We take what we want, human. Your politeness is weakness. Your soft words show fear. Do Young's smile became even warmer. Those who knew him would have recognized this as a danger sign. The politer he became, the deadlier his intentions. I respectfully disagree, Supreme Commander, he said, pouring more tea. Politeness is a choice. Just as you choose to display strength through aggression, we choose to display it through courtesy. One of the Kraxi soldiers suddenly stood up, knocking over his tea. Enough of this weak talk. We should just take this station now. Do Young carefully wiped up the spilled tea with a napkin. Please, let's not hasty. More tea. The soldier grabbed Do Young's arm. In the next second, he found himself lying on the floor, unsure how he got there. Do Young was still smiling, still holding the teapot, his tie still perfectly straight. I apologize for the interruption, Du Young said, bowing to Vex. Your soldier seemed to lose his balance. Please, shall we continue our discussion? The room was very quiet now. The Kraxi soldiers stared at their companion on the floor, then at the still smiling human who had put him there so quickly they hadn't even seen him move. Vex leaned forward, his eyes narrow. You are not what you seem, Ambassador. I am exactly what I seem. Supreme Commander, Du Young replied pleasantly. A polite human who hopes for peace between our peoples. He poured another cup of tea. But I should warn you, the politer we become, the more careful you should be. It's an odd quirk of human nature. Hanul made a note on her tablet. First contact proceeding as expected. Kraxi delegation showing signs of understanding Protocol 7. The more polite the human, the deadlier the outcome. Do Young spent the next hour discussing trade possibilities, border agreements, and cultural exchange programs. His smile never wavered. His courtesy never slipped. And the Kraxi delegation grew increasingly uncomfortable with each perfectly executed bow, each carefully chosen word. They had come expecting to intimidate a weak species. Instead, they found themselves facing something they didn't understand. Strength wrapped in silk, danger hidden behind good manners. As the meeting ended, Du Young bowed one final time. Thank you for this delightful meeting. I look forward to our next discussion. And please remember, we humans value politeness greatly. The more polite we are, the more serious we are about our intentions. After the Kraxi left, Hainul approached Du Young. They didn't understand at all, did they? No, Du Young straightened a teacup that was slightly out of alignment. But they will, eventually. He looked out the window at the Kraxi ship departing. Send a message to Earth Command. Tell them to increase defense readiness, but politely. Hanul nodded, understanding perfectly. The polite warning was the deadliest warning of all. Du Young Kim stood at the window long after the Kraxi ship disappeared from view. His reflection showed the same pleasant smile, the same perfect posture, but his eyes were calculating distances, planning movements, preparing for what he knew would come. Because in his experience, the ones who didn't understand human politeness always tried something foolish. And then they learned, usually too late, why the polite humans were the ones you should fear most. 3 days after the first meeting, Du Young Kim sat in his office on Harmony Point, reading reports. The Kraxi Empire had been quiet, too quiet. His military training told him they were planning something. Ambassador Hainul entered the office with a fresh pot of tea. We've received a message from the Kraxi. They want another meeting. Today. Do Young looked up from his tablet. Such short notice. How very impolite of them. He smiled his diplomatic smile. Please tell them we would be delighted to accommodate their request. They're already on their way, Hainul said. Their ship will arrive in 20 minutes. Ah. Du Young straightened his tie. Even more impolite. Please prepare the meeting room. The good tea set, I think. The very expensive one. Newell raised an eyebrow. She knew that when Du Young asked for the expensive tea set, he expected trouble. Of course, Ambassador. Should I alert security? No need to trouble them, Du Young said softly. But please activate Protocol 7 in the station's computer systems. Quietly. Protocol 7 was a special security measure designed by Du Young himself. It made sure all doors could be sealed instantly, all communications could be cut off, and all escape pods were ready for launch, all while looking completely normal. The Craxi ship arrived exactly 18 minutes later. It was bigger this time, with more weapons visible on its hull. Du Young watched it dock through his office window. They brought more soldiers, Newell reported, checking the station's sensors. 20 of them. How very interesting, Du Young said, his voice becoming even more polite. Please make sure we have enough teacups. The meeting room looked peaceful. Sunlight from Earth shone through the large windows. The expensive tea set gleamed on the polished table. Du Young stood by his chair, hands clasped in front of him, waiting. Supreme Commander Vex entered first. His armor was shinier than before, with more medals. Behind him came 4 guards, all carrying large weapons. Welcome back, Du Young bowed deeply. We are honored by your return visit. Though I must admit, the weapons make me worry that our tea wasn't to your taste last time. Vex didn't sit down. No more games, human. No more weak tea and soft words. The Craxi Empire demands Earth's surrender. Now. Du Young's smile grew warmer. Those who knew him would have started running. Oh my. Such a strong statement. Please, won't you sit? We should discuss this properly. There is nothing to discuss, Vex shouted. Our soldiers have already taken control of this station's key areas. You are our prisoners now. Ah. Du Young carefully adjusted a teacup that was slightly out of alignment. That would explain the extra ship and the 20 soldiers. How very thorough of you. His voice became even more formal. Though I should mention that taking hostages is considered quite rude in human culture. Newell stood in her corner, still holding her tablet. Like Du Young, she seemed completely calm. She even smiled politely at one of the guards who pointed a weapon at her. Your politeness won't save you now, human, Vex growled. Call Earth. Tell them to surrender, or we start killing station staff. Du Young picked up the teapot. Before we do that, would anyone like some tea? It's a special blend. Very calming. One of the guards stepped forward and knocked the teapot from his hands. It shattered on the floor, tea spreading across the polished surface. Oh dear, Du Young said softly. That was my favorite teapot. A gift from my old combat instructor, actually. His voice became even more polite, almost musical. Supreme Commander, I feel I should warn you. When humans become extremely polite, it often means silence. Vex raised his weapon. No more talk about tea and politeness. Call Earth now. As you wish. Du Young bowed again, lower than ever before. Newell, would you be so kind as to activate Emergency Protocol Tea Party? Newell smiled brightly. Of course, Ambassador. She pressed a single button on her tablet. Instantly, the lights went out. When they came back on 3 seconds later, 3 of the guards were on the floor. Du Young hadn't appeared to move, but his tie was slightly crooked now. My sincere apologies for the violence, he said, straightening his tie. Though I should note that pointing weapons at people is also considered quite rude. Vex fired his weapon. The energy bolt passed through the space where Du Young had been standing. Somehow, the polite ambassador was now behind one of the remaining guards, apologizing as he used the alien as a shield against his commander's next shot. Newell, still smiling pleasantly, had somehow disarmed the guard nearest to her. Please be careful with your weapons, she said kindly. Someone could get hurt. The room became chaos. but a very polite chaos. Du Young moved like water, flowing between the guards, apologizing constantly as he disabled them one by one. "So sorry about your arm. Oh dear, that looks painful. Please forgive the inconvenience." Newell tapped commands into her tablet, sealing doors and shutting down the other Craxi soldiers throughout the station. She did it all while maintaining perfect posture and a helpful smile. In exactly 47 seconds, Supreme Commander Vex found himself alone, his guards unconscious or groaning on the floor. Du Young stood in front of him, bow tie slightly askew, still smiling. "Now then," Du Young said, his voice radiating politeness, "shall we discuss the proper protocols for diplomatic meetings? I would be happy to provide a lesson." He straightened his tie. "Though I should warn you, my teaching methods can be quite hands-on." Vex looked at his fallen soldiers, then at the still smiling human. What are you?" "Me." Du Young began carefully picking up pieces of the broken teapot. "I'm just a very polite person who believes in solving problems diplomatically. Though my definition of diplomacy was somewhat shaped by 20 years in special forces." He looked up, still smiling. "Would you like to surrender now? I would hate to have to demonstrate any more of my diplomatic techniques." The Supreme Commander of the mighty Craxi Empire looked around the room once more. His soldiers were defeated. His plan had failed, and the human was still being unbearably polite about it all. I surrender," Vex said quietly. "Wonderful." Du Young's smile brightened. "Newell, would you be kind enough to bring our guests some restraints? The comfortable ones, please, and perhaps we should call Earth Command. Politely, of course." "Of course, Ambassador." Newell was already sending the message. Diplomatic incident resolved. Craxi aggression handled with appropriate politeness. Medical teams may be required. Also, we need a new tea set. Du Young spent the next hour helping the medical teams with the injured Craxi soldiers, apologizing to each one for any discomfort they might have experienced. His politeness never wavered, even as he made sure their restraints were secure. When Earth Command finally responded, Du Young gave them a very polite report about the incident. He especially emphasized how the Craxi might benefit from some diplomatic training. After all, he explained to a still stunned Vex, proper manners are so important in preventing misunderstandings. Don't you agree? The Supreme Commander could only nod. He was beginning to understand why the human saying went, "The politer they are, the deadlier they become." Du Young looked at the broken tea set one last time. Newell, please order a new tea set. Something sturdy. I have a feeling we'll be having many more diplomatic meetings in the future." "Yes, Ambassador." Newell smiled. "Should I order the reinforced cups? The ones designed by the Special Forces?" "That would be most appropriate," Du Young agreed. "After all, we must always be prepared to be polite, no matter the circumstances." Security Officer G.A. Lee sat in Earth Command's monitoring center, watching the screens with growing concern. The Craxi Empire had moved 3 more warships toward Earth's space after their failed attempt to take Harmony Point Station. More concerning was the message they had just received. The Craxi Emperor himself was coming to resolve the situation. "The Emperor demands we hand over Ambassador Kim and his assistant for punishment," one of her analysts reported. "He says their actions were an insult to Craxi honor." Jia checked the latest report from Harmony Point. Du Young had filed it just an hour ago, and its politeness level was off the charts. He had used formal honorifics for everyone, even the captured Craxi soldiers. This was not a good sign. "Send a message to Harmony Point," she ordered. "Tell them the Emperor is coming. Mark it as urgent." On Harmony Point, Du Young read the message while arranging flowers in the meeting room. The captured Supreme Commander Vex watched him from his comfortable but secure holding cell. "Your Emperor is coming," Du Young said pleasantly. "How wonderful. Newell, we'll need to prepare a proper welcome. The very best tea set, I think. The one made of reinforced materials." Newell looked up from her tablet. "The Emperor's ship is carrying enough weapons to destroy this station 10 times over." Then we should be extra polite, Du Young smiled. Perhaps we should prepare some traditional Korean formal wear. The very formal kind. Hanul understood immediately. The more traditional and formal Du Young became, the more dangerous the situation was about to get. She had seen him bow deeply to an enemy once, wearing full hanbok, right before he took down an entire hostile facility. "Shall I activate all security protocols?" she asked. "Oh yes," Du Young adjusted his tie. "Very politely, of course, and please ask Earth Command to be ready for any diplomatic complications." In her command center, GA saw the security alerts from Harmony Point light up one by one. Each was marked with a polite message about routine system checks. She immediately put Earth's entire defense fleet on high alert. "Ma'am," one of her officers said, "Ambassador Kim just requested formal diplomatic music for the Emperor's arrival, and he's wearing traditional hanbok." "Stars help us," Jie muttered. She had worked with Du Young during his Special Forces days. The last time he had dressed traditionally for a mission, 3 enemy bases had mysteriously ceased to exist. "Prepare all defensive systems, and somebody get me the Admiral." The Kraxi Emperor's ship arrived with great ceremony. It was enormous, covered in golden decorations and weapon ports. 4 more warships escorted it, all pointing their weapons at Harmony Point. Du Young stood in the docking bay, wearing full traditional Korean hanbok in dark blue silk. He looked perfectly calm and very, very polite. Hae-Nul stood beside him, also in traditional dress, her tablet hidden in her flowing sleeves. "I have a very bad feeling about this," Supreme Commander Vex said from his cell, watching on a screen. "When humans dress up formally and act extra polite, very bad things happen." The Emperor was huge, even for a Kraxi. His armor was solid gold, and he carried a ceremonial weapon that was definitely not just ceremonial. 20 elite guards surrounded him, all carrying heavy weapons. Du Young bowed so deeply that it seemed impossible for him to move quickly from that position. Of course, those who knew him knew that this was when he was most dangerous. "Most honorable Emperor," he said, his voice formal and musical. "We are deeply humbled by your august presence. Please allow this unworthy one to welcome you to Harmony Point." The Emperor growled. "Enough of your mockery. You dare to attack my Supreme Commander, to shame the mighty Kraxi Empire." "Oh dear." Du Young straightened up, still smiling politely. "There seems to be a misunderstanding. We merely responded to an impolite breach of diplomatic protocol. Perhaps we could discuss this over tea. I have prepared a most excellent blend. The only thing we will discuss is your surrender." The Emperor roared. "Your pathetic station is surrounded. Your weak human politeness cannot save you now." Du Young's smile became even warmer, even more polite. In Earth Command, JA saw this on the video feed and immediately ordered all ships to battle stations. "Most esteemed Emperor," Du Young said, bowing again, "I feel I must point out, with the greatest possible respect, that threatening a diplomatic station is considered quite rude in human culture. Perhaps we could find a more courteous solution." The Emperor raised his weapon. "Here is my courteous solution." He fired at Du Young. What happened next was recorded by Harmony Point's security cameras and later used in diplomatic training across the galaxy. The shot passed through empty air as Du Young somehow moved faster than seemed possible, his formal robes flowing like water. 3 guards were down before anyone saw him move. "My sincere apologies for the violence," Du Young said, disarming 2 more guards while appearing to merely adjust his sleeves. "But pointing weapons at a diplomatic envoy is tremendously impolite." Hae-Nul, moving with equal grace in her traditional dress, had already sealed all escape routes and disabled the Emperor's ship's weapon systems. She did this while maintaining perfect posture and a serene smile. "Your Majesty," she said politely, "I regret to inform you that your ship's weapons are temporarily unavailable. Might I suggest we all sit down for tea?" The Emperor roared and charged at Du Young, swinging his ceremonial weapon. Du Young sidestepped gracefully, apologizing as he used the Emperor's momentum to send him flying into his own guards. Such energetic discussions are best had while seated, Du Young advised, somehow serving tea while avoiding energy bolts from the remaining guards. Violence over tea is most improper. In Earth Command, GA watched the security feeds with a mixture of awe and resignation. This is why we recruited him from Special Forces, she explained to the Admiral. Nobody is more polite, and therefore nobody is more deadly. The fight, if it could be called that, lasted exactly 3 minutes. When it ended, the Emperor of the mighty Kraxi Empire found himself sitting at a tea table, his guards either unconscious or disarmed, while Du Young poured tea as if nothing unusual had happened. "Now then," Du Young said, his formal robes somehow still perfectly arranged despite the combat. "Shall we discuss diplomatic relations between our peoples? I find these conversations go much better with proper manners." The Emperor looked at his fallen guards, then at his disabled ships on the view screen, then at the eerily calm human serving tea. What are you?" "Me?" Du Young smiled his most polite smile. "I am merely a humble diplomat who believes strongly in good manners. Now about those threats to Earth." Newell sent a message to Earth Command. "Situation resolved with appropriate politeness. Medical teams required. Also, need replacement tea set again. Recommend reinforced diplomatic furniture for future meetings." Jia received the message and finally relaxed. "Stand down from alert," she ordered. "The situation has been handled with extreme politeness." Later, as medical teams treated the Kraxi guards, Du Young sat with the Emperor, carefully explaining human diplomatic protocols. "You see, Your Majesty," he said, pouring fresh tea, "in human culture, the more polite we become, the more serious we are. When we dress formally and speak with extreme courtesy, it often means we are prepared for extremely discourteous situations." The Emperor, nursing a sore arm and wounded pride, finally began to understand. "Your politeness is a warning." "Exactly." Du Young beamed. "I'm so pleased you understand. More tea. I believe we can now begin proper diplomatic relations, with full courtesy on both sides. Unless, of course, you'd prefer another demonstration." "No," the Emperor said quickly. "No, tea is good. Politeness is good." "Wonderful." Du Young smiled his most diplomatic smile. "Newell, please make a note. The Emperor has excellent diplomatic potential. We should schedule regular tea ceremonies for cultural exchange." In her corner, Newell smiled and made the note, adding, "Recommend stockpiling reinforced tea sets. The politer we are, the more we seem to need them." 1 week after the Emperor's visit to Harmony Point, things had become surprisingly peaceful. The Kraxi Empire had withdrawn their warships, and diplomatic talks were proceeding well. Perhaps too well, Du Young thought as he read the morning reports. "The Emperor has agreed to all our trade terms," Newell said, setting down a fresh cup of tea on his desk. "He's even suggested cultural exchange programs." Du Young adjusted his perfectly straight tie. How very cooperative of him. Almost suspiciously so. Just then, Security Officer Jia Li's face appeared on the communication screen. Her expression was carefully blank, the kind of blank that meant trouble. "Ambassador," she said formally, "our sensors have detected several small ships approaching Harmony Point. They're using stealth technology, but they're definitely Kraxi design." "How interesting." Du Young smiled his most polite smile. "And just when relations were improving so nicely. Newell, would you be kind enough to check on our security systems?" "Of course, Ambassador." Newell bowed slightly. "Should I prepare the special diplomatic response protocols?" "That would be most appropriate." Du Young stood up, straightening his cuffs. "And perhaps we should set out the emergency tea set. The reinforced one." Jia watched them prepare through the security feeds. She had known Du Young long enough to recognize the signs. The straighter his tie, the more dangerous the situation. Right now, his tie was perfectly, impossibly straight. All Earth Defense Forces are on standby, she reported. Though I notice you haven't requested any assistance. Oh, that won't be necessary yet, Du Young said pleasantly. Let's not be impolite and assume the worst. Though perhaps you could stand by, just in case our guests require some cultural education. The first sign of trouble came 3 hours later. The station's communications suddenly went dark. Outside communication was cut off, and internal systems began shutting down. How inconsiderate, Du Young remarked, calmly pouring tea in the main meeting room. Mule, do you have access to our backup systems? Yes, Ambassador, she replied, tapping on her tablet. Though it seems our visitors are being quite thorough. They've infected our main computer with some kind of virus. Ah, Du Young set down the teapot. That would explain why Supreme Commander Vex was so cooperative lately. He was buying time for this. He straightened his tie again, most discourteous. The lights flickered and died. When they came back on, the meeting room was full of armed Kraxi soldiers. They weren't regular troops. These wore the black armor of the Empire's elite assassination squad. Ambassador Du Young Kim, their leader, stepped forward. The Emperor sends his regards, and his assassins. Welcome, Du Young bowed deeply. Though I must point out that arriving unannounced is considered quite rude in human culture, would you care for some tea while we discuss proper diplomatic protocols? The assassin leader laughed. Always with the tea and manners. Your politeness means nothing now. We have control of your station. Your communications are cut off. And we have your assistant. 2 soldiers grabbed Henul, who had been quietly working on her tablet in the corner. She didn't resist, just smiled politely at her captors. Oh dear, Du Young's voice became even more formal, even more polite. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. I really must insist that you release Ms. Park. Threatening diplomatic staff is extremely inappropriate. Or what? The assassin leader pressed a weapon against Henul's head. You'll serve us more tea. Show us more polite bows. Actually, Du Young smiled his warmest, most dangerous smile. I was thinking it might be time for a practical demonstration of why humans become more polite when situations become more deadly. What happened next would later be described in the official report as a diplomatic incident involving cultural misunderstandings about personal space. The security cameras caught most of it, though some moments were too fast to follow. Du Young moved like flowing water, his tie remaining perfectly straight as he disabled 3 assassins before the first one hit the floor. Henul, far from being the helpless hostage, used her tablet as an improvised weapon with devastating efficiency. Please pardon the violence, Du Young said, disarming 2 more attackers while seemingly just adjusting his sleeves. But your behavior has been most unmannerly. Henul, having freed herself, was now systematically shutting down the virus in the station's computer system. She did this while simultaneously using her martial arts training on any assassin who came too close. The backup systems are online, Ambassador, she reported calmly, as if she weren't currently throwing an alien soldier twice her size across the room. Would you like me to contact Earth Command? That would be most helpful, Du Young replied, apologizing politely to an assassin as he used the alien's own momentum to send him crashing into his companions. Though perhaps we should clean up this minor diplomatic misunderstanding first. The assassination squad's leader watched in horror as his elite troops were systematically dismantled by 2 impossibly polite humans. The more kills his soldiers racked up in normal missions, the more elaborate their death marks, but nothing in their training had prepared them for this. What kind of diplomats are you? He demanded, firing his weapon at Du Young, who simply wasn't there when the shot arrived. Oh, very dedicated ones. Du Young appeared behind him, smiling pleasantly. We believe strongly in hands-on diplomatic resolution. He disabled the leader with a series of movements too fast to follow. Though I really must insist on better manners in the future. When J.A.'s face appeared on the newly restored communication screen, she found Du Young calmly serving tea to the conscious survivors of the assassination squad. all of whom were securely restrained but seated comfortably. "I see you've had some visitors," she said dryly. "Yes." Du Young adjusted a teacup that was slightly out of alignment. "We had a small cultural exchange about the importance of proper diplomatic protocols. I believe our guests have learned quite a lot." Hamnul, her hair still perfectly arranged despite the combat, was making notes on her tablet. "Shall I prepare a report for Earth Command?" "A polite one, of course." "Please do." Du Young smiled at the captured assassins, and perhaps mentioned that the Emperor might benefit from some additional diplomatic training. "The advanced course, I think." The assassin leader, nursing several very precise injuries, looked up at his captors. "I don't understand. We're the Empire's most elite killers. How can you be so deadly and so polite?" "Ah." Du Young poured him another cup of tea. "That's the wonderful thing about human diplomacy. The more polite we are, the more options we have for explaining cultural differences. Sometimes those explanations require words. Sometimes they require action. But they always require perfect manners." G.A., watching from Earth Command, began preparing her own report. She made sure to mark it as diplomatically sensitive, and added a note: "Recommend updating first contact protocols to emphasize correlation between human politeness and combat capability. Also recommend stockpiling reinforced T-sets." As the medical teams arrived to treat the injured assassins, Du Young straightened his tie one final time. "Henul, please schedule a meeting with the Emperor. I believe it's time for a very polite discussion about diplomatic etiquette." "Of course, Ambassador." Henul smiled serenely. "Shall I prepare the formal tea ceremony materials?" "Yes." Du Young's smile was warm and deadly. "The very formal ones. After all, we must maintain proper diplomatic courtesy, even when teaching lessons about proper behavior." The captured assassins shuddered. They were beginning to understand why the human diplomatic corps had such a fearsome reputation. It wasn't despite their perfect manners. It was because of them. Down in his cell, Supreme Commander Vex heard about the failed assassination attempt and shook his head. "I tried to warn them," he muttered. "The politer the human, the deadlier the outcome. But nobody ever listens until after the tea ceremony." The Galactic Council chamber was silent as Du Young Kim finished his report about the incidents with the Kraxi Empire. He stood perfectly straight at the speaking platform, his tie exactly aligned, while representatives from 200 alien species listened in growing amazement. "And so," he concluded with a polite bow, "I respectfully suggest that the Council update its first contact protocols to include information about human diplomatic customs, particularly regarding the relationship between politeness and dangerous situations." Hanul stood nearby, taking notes on her tablet. The Kraxi Emperor sat in his delegation's seat, looking uncomfortable but significantly more polite than he had been a month ago. His arm was still in a sling from his last diplomatic discussion with Du Young. The council leader, a tall blue-skinned alien, leaned forward. "Let me understand this clearly. When humans become more polite, it means they are becoming more dangerous." "That is correct." Du Young smiled warmly. "Would you like me to demonstrate?" "I brought tea." "No." Several delegates shouted at once. The Kraxi Emperor actually flinched. "Are all human diplomats like this?" another council member asked. "Oh no." Du Young adjusted his cuffs. "Some are much more polite than I am." A murmur of worry spread through the chamber. The idea that there were even more polite, and therefore more dangerous, humans out there was deeply concerning. Security Officer G. Lee watched the council meeting through a secure feed in Earth Command. She was preparing training materials about the new diplomatic protocols that would be shared across the galaxy. "The key thing to remember," she wrote, "is that human politeness serves two purposes. First, it shows respect. Second, it warns others that we are prepared to be extremely thorough in resolving any conflicts that may arise." Back in the council chamber, the delegates were voting on the new first contact protocols. The measure passed unanimously, possibly because Du Young stood watching them with his most polite smile. The new guidelines were simple but clear. When dealing with humans in diplomatic situations, pay careful attention to their level of politeness. The more formal and courteous they become, the more cautiously you should proceed. If a human diplomat begins using extremely polite language, consider it a final warning. A young Craxi delegate raised his hand. But what if we're not sure how polite is too polite? An excellent question. Du Yum beamed at him. Henul, would you be kind enough to share our politeness scale? Henul stepped forward with her tablet. Of course, Ambassador. We've created a simple guide. She displayed a chart on the main screen. Level 1. Normal diplomatic courtesy, standard situation. Level 2. Increased formality, mild concern. Level 3. Traditional formal wear, serious situation. Level 4. Tea ceremony, final warning. Level 5. Extreme politeness with tea ceremony in traditional dress, combat imminent. As you can see, Du Yum explained pleasantly, we've made it quite straightforward. Though I should mention that this is merely a basic guide. Some humans might skip directly to level 5 if the situation warrants immediate cultural education. The council leader looked worried. And what level of politeness are you displaying now, Ambassador Kim? Oh, only level 2, Du Young smiled. This is a friendly meeting after all. Would anyone like some tea? Several delegates quickly declined, having heard about Du Young's tea ceremonies from the Craxi reports. After the council meeting, Du Young and Haenul walked through the grand halls of the Galactic Council building. Alien diplomats politely moved out. I believe it went well, Du Young said, straightening his already perfect tie. Though I noticed some of the delegates seemed nervous when I mentioned tea. Yes, Haenul made a note on her tablet. The Craxi Empire has been sharing stories about our diplomatic methods. Apparently, they've started including tea ceremony defense training in their military programs. Do Young chuckled softly. How wonderful that they're taking human customs seriously. By the way, has Earth Command approved our request for more reinforced tea sets? They've ordered 100 new sets, Haenul replied. Extra sturdy ones. They're also adding martial arts and tea ceremony training to the standard diplomatic curriculum. In Earth Command, JA was putting the finishing touches on the new training manual for alien diplomats. The title read, Understanding Human Diplomatic Signals, a Survival Guide. The first page contained a simple warning. If a human diplomat becomes extremely polite, consider your next actions very carefully. The more courteous they become, the more dangerous the situation is about to get. She added a personal note at the bottom. And if they offer you tea while wearing traditional formal clothes, you may want to surrender immediately. The Craxi Emperor, now back in his palace, had ordered all his diplomats to study human customs carefully. He had also replaced all his military advisors with experts in human diplomatic protocols. Remember, he told his new chief diplomat, when humans bow very low and speak with perfect courtesy, they're not showing weakness. They're giving you a chance to avoid what comes next. And if they offer tea? The diplomat asked nervously. Then you'd better hope you remember your manners. The emperor touched his healed arm thoughtfully. Because humans take diplomatic incidents very seriously. Very politely, but very seriously. Back on Harmony Point, Du Young arranged his new collection of reinforced tea sets carefully. Each one was beautiful, elegant, and strong enough to survive a small explosion. Just like human diplomacy. Hanul, he called out, please schedule tea ceremonies with all new alien delegations. I believe it's important to establish proper diplomatic relations early. Of course, Ambassador, she smiled, already making notes. Shall I include a copy of the new protocols with each invitation? The ones about politeness levels.